Put it that way. We've both been here since the 70s. We've both seen a lot of changes. We both never dreamed it would take COVID to make more people come to Carrabassett than all the decades we've been working so hard to try and get people to come here. So that's a bit of an irony over what the past year has been like. But now we're looking at another summer, and there's things to talk about.
I was hoping that we would not be sitting here again in May having the same discussion that Andy and I had a year ago about the posting of the lands, the closing of the trails on all the Penobscot Nation's land in Carrabassett Valley. And unfortunately, here we are again.
Even worse with the carriage road now closed.
Yeah, the carriage road was, that kind of fell through a donut hole because they had already issued us a permit for the carriage road last year. But now the carriage road is closed. The narrow gauge to the south to the Jones lot is closed. It's difficult. And just to go back briefly, a year ago, there was a bill before the legislature that the Penobscot Nation and all the Passamaquoddies and the other tribes had put forth to the legislature. We didn't find out about it until the 11th hour, quite frankly. It started in March, and we found out about it in, I think it was right about now, late May, June. And what did happen because of COVID is the legislature stopped meeting. So the bill went over to this next legislature, which brought over a new bill, which in many ways was even more restrictive, in my opinion, than the first bill. But we were talking all through the winter. We talked, or we tried to talk, and so there we were again at odds with the Penobscots, which just a little bit of history. In 1980, the Maine Indian Settlement, or the Maine Indians Claim Act, and then the Maine Indian Settlement Act were passed in 1980. It went on for 8 years, from 1972 to 1980. And at the time, it was pretty much a landmark decision which gave back to the nations land, that it was specified land in the unorganized territories. Alder Stream up in Big Jam and 40 other parcels of land that were made available. What happened here in Carrabassett Valley, we're a town and a municipality. So what happened is Dead River, the Penobscots wanted Alder Stream, which is up in Eustis. But Dead River Company that owned that land and owned this land in Carrabassett would not sell one without the other. And I use the word sell. What it really was the federal government ended up giving tax breaks to the large corporations to deed their land over, which is fine. That was a win-win, and that was a good thing. But what happened was, and the Implementing Act specifically stated it, is that if land that was given to the nation was put into an organized town or city, that it would have to come before the voters of that town before it could be put into federal trust. And federal trust is a vehicle that really allows the nations to self-govern. And they are seeking sovereignty, which is understandable. The problem in our case is that we were like that little tiny little thing that was specifically earmarked that only happened because Dead River said you have to take it all or we're not going to sell you some. So here we sit. That being said, that's 40 years ago. And for 40 years, we've had a pretty good relationship. Like any marriage, any relationship, we've had ups and downs, but we've shared things. And, basically we built a lot of bike trails on their lands, and they approved of that. The carriage road, which we spoke of earlier, is the only access out to Flagstaff, and coincidentally, the main access to the Bigelow Preserve, which is public lands. And last year, again, we already had a permit. It was a yearly permit. We had usage. This year, we have no usage. So the carriage road at this point and all the lands in Carrabassett Valley are posted to be closed. We have tried to continue this discussion. We've dealt with their ambassador, Molly and Dana. who's been responsive. We had one Zoom meeting with Chief Francis, who's the chief of the Penobscots, and Molly and Dana, the ambassador, and we felt that we gained some ground, that they were going to discuss it. That was back in March. It turned out nothing ever became of it. And here we are now almost in June, and we've sent letters. We've gone and testified at the legislature for the new bill. It's Bill 1568, which got replaced by Bill 1626 at the 11th hour when we were there about 2 weeks ago. Anyway, long story short, it got tabled by the legislature. And we're not really sure why it got tabled by the legislature. In a lot of ways, it was more prohibitive than the bill that came a year ago. It had more things in there that basically took away all the state's rights to fish and game, water rights, hunting rights, and Department of Environmental Protection, the EPA. So the governor was clearly not in favor of it either. So it's been tabled till the next legislature, which is after January of this coming year. How can it be January of this coming year? It'd have to be January of 2022. So there's a long-winded introduction into where we're at. We continue to discuss. We've made numerous requests, and I know that this is a sovereignty issue for them, but we have not gotten any definitive conversations that indicate why the land is posted, why the roads and the permits not issued. This affects the ATV club, it affects the snowmobile club, and it affects all the UT trails, which is throughout the state of Maine. So it conflicts with a lot of things. And again, I will emphasize, it was through their generosity that we were able to build these trails and use those trails. So we're just trying to get to that point where we can see if we can pull that out of what they're proposing for sovereignty and have some type of a longer term agreement.
We have no way of knowing if it's negotiable at some point in the future, or if they're just pulling the no trespassing, our land, we don't want anybody on it card, which happens around here with paper companies and other people who just decide they don't want people on their land, and they have the right to do that, unfortunately, don't they?
Yes, they do. And Maine has a long history of the major landowners, the paper companies, allowing recreation on their land. In fact, there was bills passed by the legislature that takes away any liability those landowners may have if they allow other people to use their land. So that's the history in Maine of how that developed. So yeah, again, and COVID is out there. I mean, there's no doubt the last year has kind of put everything on hold. We felt going into the legislature this year, we would be there in the beginning, we could talk and we could work something out. And that unfortunately never really happened. So we are back at square one. Again, I tell people it's their land, respect it. It's not legally posted, but there are no trespassing signs, a couple that are up. And we also have knowledge that they don't want us to use their trails or the trails on their land. So we have to be respectful of that, and we're hopeful that we can come to some kind of a mutual agreement. Because as a town, and I don't say this idly, we were proud to have the Penobscot Nation as our neighbors. I mean, we all grew up learning history, and the Indians have a lot of history, and we understand that. And all we're trying to do is get back to where we were and understand why we are where we are today. And therein lies the problem.
Right. And there aren't really too many who actually reside around here, so it's not like they're actually part of our community. Maybe that's part of the problem. They don't feel that they're reaping the benefits of being here, so why should they let us reap the benefits when they get nothing from it?
And that's, if that's it, we can work with that. You know, let's talk about that. We have some, I think, very progressive ideas as how they can put this land in trust and get it with the vote of the town and have some mutual agreements. I mean, there's other opportunities available to the tribes that we have researched, but we haven't sat down and had a conversation where we can present that, because there hasn't been that type of atmosphere. And again, their you know, their view of this is much bigger than ours in terms of all the lands in Maine, and we understand that. But again, I go back to the Maine Implementing Act of 1980. It took 8 years to negotiate, and this is trying to be rewritten. Excuse me, it's bug season, even when you're in a screened-in porch. But anyway, it's, we're hopeful, and to date, we have had very little conversation, very little understanding of what we think can happen if we knew exactly what they would like to have happen.
Do you think the fact that we're pushing back a little bit on the legal premise, what they want to do with their land, do you think that is antagonizing the situation and they're looking at us as an adversary?
I think as a realistic view, yes, I do, because we have been, for instance, I just wrote the ambassador and said it's difficult for me to be one of 3 people that testified at the legislature against this bill, because typically, having been born in the 70s, haven't been blossomed in the 70s, is that we want to right all the wrongs, and I understand that, but this is taking away the rights of the town, which go back to the inception of the state. And so there has to be a balance. And we feel that we have proposals that would allow that balance, but we haven't got there. We haven't been allowed to even present them, and that's been difficult. Their picture is bigger than ours, but I can tell you that the reality of we were all been working on testimony. We've handed in written testimony. We got there 2 weeks ago. We testified. We're all ready for everything to happen. Then the governor's aide gets up, and he was the other of the 3 of us that testified against, basically said the governor would have a very difficult time supporting this bill because it takes away the rights of the basic industry, the basic, the DEP, the EPA, fish and game, wildlife, everything. It takes away all that control or all that rulemaking from the state. And I think that's why all of a sudden a motion was brought up by one of the legislators to table, and it got tabled on a 9-1 vote, a 9-0 vote in 1 minute. All of a sudden we're going, what happened? Okay, we're back another year again. So, yeah, it's difficult for the nation, I can understand, and it's difficult for the state. And we're a tiny, tiny piece of this, but that right to vote exists there for a reason, because home rule is the basis of Maine law. And home rule basically gives the towns and cities the right to increase ordinances above what the state says. And I feel that we are a very conservation-oriented recreational community. We have a tough balancing act because we want a lot of people to come and recreate, and we want to continue to expand those recreation opportunities, but at the same token, we want to preserve the nature, which is why people come here, as we look out behind my house. The legislature has basically given us 8 months to sit down and talk and get us off the table. We can come up with an agreement that's acceptable to both of us, that is not going to take away the nation's sovereign rights, and at the same token recognize the fact that this land is unique because it's what we call fee land. All the other lands, there were 40 parcels of land made available to the nations. Those were all in the unorganized territories, which come under the jurisdiction of LERC and the state. We were one of only 2 pieces of land that were fee land that were in an organized town, and thus the reason that the town has the right to vote if the nation wants to put it into trust. We have some really, really conscientious groups, the outdoor club, the bike club, the mountain bike, the snowmobile club, the ATV, very, very responsible. And we have even proposed that, look, someone said something like that maybe there was trash on the grounds. And we had heard this through a third party, that maybe that was the reason. So just this past month, we proposed to the land committee, look, we will we will show you that we will do whatever we need to do to make sure there is no trash, and
like you say, it's a much bigger issue than that.
it is a bigger issue than that, and it's frustrating. We are as respectful as they deserve that respect, and by the same token, we have to acknowledge that that rule is there, and that is the only way that us and the nation can have a balanced negotiating field, because we have that right to vote, which every town in the state of Maine has that right to vote.
We live and work here, so it affects us. That's what's such a bummer. 'Cause it
That's
doesn't
correct.
affect them one bit. It
But
affects us.
again, I think, we don't want to develop this land, or they have the right to develop it. They have the right to develop it. In fact, back 1990, they had a study done by a group, and they pointed out where land could be developed within the town if they wanted to do high density housing or whatever it be, which we'd love to see housing done. They chose not to. That's their right. So I think everything's on the table, but the meal hasn't come.